Okay,
Welcome
go ahead.
to today's telephone town hall. Tonight we'll be discussing the facts behind Measure 92. If you have any questions at any time during the event, please press 0 to join us where you're looking for a lively and interactive event tonight. We have 3 guests with us. We have Kevin, who's a farmer in Madras. We have Ian Tollison, who's with the Northwest Food Processors, and Dana Bieber, who's an advocate for the No on 92 Coalition. And again, it's really important that we hear from you. That's the whole point tonight, is that we have a conversation. If at any time you'd like to ask a question, please press 0. First, now I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Kevin Richards is a farmer from Madras whose family grows carrot seeds, grass seeds, peppermint oil, alfalfa, wheat, and hay. Before farming full-time, Kevin served with the American Farm Bureau Federation. Kevin?
Hi, thanks very much for that introduction. I'm really pleased to be joining the call tonight and kind of representing a farmer's perspective, answering a few questions, and hopefully correcting some of the misconceptions that are out there and urging you to vote no on 92. When I think about 92, there's 2 different types of costs that really concern me as a farmer. One are the direct costs, the higher stewardship, labor, equipment costs in order to segregate and maintain the integrity of crops. Reduced profitability if Measure 92 forces me or other family farmers to divert their production into different crops, and then just more record keeping and legal risks that most family farms aren't really well suited to deal with, and the burdens of those costs fall greatest on small farmers. And then I'm also really concerned about some of the indirect costs. So Measure 92 is just unilateral labeling only here in Oregon, and that really puts a lot of family farmers like myself at a competitive disadvantage. And it also, I think, serves to discourage research and innovation that could really benefit agriculture in the future and help us get more beneficial crops in the future. So really pleased to join you and urge you to vote no on 92.
Thank you, Kevin. And again, if you're just joining us, this is a No on 92 telephone town hall, and we're really interested to hear from you. So if you have any questions, go ahead and press 0 to be connected with an operator to ask your question. The next person to join us tonight will be Ian Tollison. Ian is with the Northwest Food Processors Association, representing small and large food producers on issues relating to labeling, regulations, and food costs. Ian?
Hi, thank you, and good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight as we discuss a very important ballot measure. My name is Ian. I work with farmers and food processors here in Oregon. I'm part of the No on 92 Coalition because this measure hurts small family farmers, it increases food costs, and it conflicts with national food labeling standards. Ballot Measure 92 is so badly written that it will not tell consumers what is in their foods. It will exempt 2/3 of the food we eat and does not tell us what ingredients have been genetically engineered. Oregon represents less than 1% of the U.S. food market, and this type of law would really limit the ability of small food producers to sell their products here in Oregon. Finally, the free market already identifies foods that do not contain GE ingredients through the USDA Organic Program and the Non-GMO Project. Those are 2 trusted and verifiable ways to tell consumers what's in their food. And that is definitely available, and this ballot measure is not needed because of that. So thank you for joining us tonight, and I ask you to vote no with us on this damaging ballot measure. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. And again, if you just joined us, this is a telephone town hall on Measure 92. We know there's a lot of information out there right now, and this is your chance to get the facts. If you have any questions at all, you can press 0 on your phone to be connected with an operator and ask your question on the call. And again, we'll remind people that this measure is out right now with ballots in your hands, and now's the time to get them in. Now I'm going to go ahead and introduce our last speaker tonight. That's Dana Bieber. Dana is an advocate for the No on 92 Coalition, which represents Oregon farmers, ranchers, consumers, businesses, and taxpayers from across the state. Dana has studied the public policy impacts of mandatory single-state labeling proposals such as Measure 92. Dana?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening and spending a little bit of time to talk about Measure 92. As you heard Kevin and Ian mention, this is really a misleading and costly labeling initiative, and it doesn't give consumers reliable information. And actually, 2/3 of the food that's even sold under Measure 92 gets a special exemption and wouldn't have to be labeled. So while consumers won't get reliable information, what they will get is increased costs both at the grocery store and on tax day. So we'd like to talk to you a little bit tonight about the cost of segregation and the cost of in-ingredient substitution just for food sold here in Oregon and what that means to shoppers in the grocery store. And also to talk about the cost to taxpayers. This is going to have to be regulated and enforced in the state, and the Department of Administrative Services has said it's going to be about $14 million every budget cycle, but yet there's no funding source for this. So the cost implications are serious for Oregon consumers and taxpayers, and we just look forward to having a discussion with you tonight and welcome any questions that you may have. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dana. Again, ballots are in your hands right now. This is your chance to vote. Make sure to get your ballot in and urge your family and friends to do the same. It's important that we all register our voice on this important measure. Now, we want to go ahead and ask a question that's come in to us. Dana, maybe you can talk a little bit about how Measure 92 is going to be enforced.
Measure 92 requires not one, but 2 state agencies will be responsible for enforcing this. And what they'll have to do is they will have to inspect and monitor thousands and thousands of farms all across the state and tens of thousands of food products in thousands of stores across the state to ensure that there's compliance. And here's the hard part about it. Measure 92 doesn't identify a funding source for it. So what that means then is it has to come from existing state revenues. And there is also no limit of taxpayer money that can be spent on this. So it's unlimited. That's one of the troubling components of it, that it's very costly to taxpayers. And so when we talk about the cost, it's not just the cost at the grocery store, but it's the cost that taxpayers will have to see as well.
And Dana, I'll just jump in there. I'm very familiar with the Oregon legislative process. In times of shrinking budgets to education, to loss, to public safety, and other essential services, I think this is just very damaging when you're going to have to now have the state to enforce this kind of misleading measure. So thanks for bringing that up. I think that's a very important point to make here.
Thank you. And again, we'd love to hear from you. So if you have any questions, press 0 to be connected. Now, we have a question. We're going to go to a question that we've gotten from Sarah in Portland, which is, how is Measure 92 different than other countries that label GMOs?
Sarah, I'll answer that question. I know you had to jump off the line, so you weren't able to ask your question yourself, so I apologize for that. But I still think you had a great question. I'd like to answer it for the others here. Measure 92 actually is entirely different from the labeling standards that are set in other countries. For starters, Measure 92 doesn't tell you which ingredients are GMO and how much of the product is GMO. So that's already a difference. Another difference is that Measure 92 has what's called a zero tolerance. Other countries have anywhere up to a 5% tolerance. So this is the most stringent tolerance in the entire world. In fact, you'll probably hear Ian and Kevin talk quite a bit about the zero tolerance and what it means for farmers and food producers. So the proponents like to talk a lot about the other countries. Measure 92 labeling standards are nothing like those. They actually chose to write a measure that isn't like those labeling standards.
If I could just add, Dana, I think one of the biggest differences from a farmer's perspective is that other countries have federal labeling standards, and Measure 92 would be only for Oregon. And that fragmentation all across the U.S. that could be created by different labeling standards really puts a lot of worry into a lot of farmers' minds when they think about how they're going to be able to export and market their crops.
Yeah, and that definitely affects processors because, of course, we just don't package food and sell food just within our border. We are really a global community, and we are feeding the world. We're feeding our state, but we're feeding our country. We're feeding people in Washington and Idaho, and the added record keeping and to keep the food separate in that food stream will just add another barrier to food producers, and which of course would raise the cost.
Thanks. And I'm now going to go to questions from Michael in Salem. But again, before that, if you have a question, you can press 0 to ask it at any time. Michael, I understand you have a question about who's funding the measure.
Yeah, I'm specifically interested in who is behind this measure, who or what organization, and can you be very specific on that? Thank you.
Hey, Michael, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question for you. You know, this is a recycled initiative. Actually, Oregon voters, as you probably remember, rejected it years ago, and then the same group took it to California, where they rejected it. Last year, Oregon voters looked at it, and they shot it down as well. It's been the same out-of-state group that's been funding this. It's, for example, the primary funders and who have been really shopping this around to the western states has been the main funder is Dr. Bronner's Magic Soaps. That is actually the name of the company, and they're out of California. And another funder to the campaign is a company by the name of Mercola, and they sell like supplements and things like that. They're based out of Illinois, and they just simply have a personal agenda that they're trying to push on voters in these various states, and they've done it unsuccessfully year after year. And they started this whole thing in Oregon, and we think this is where it needs to end. It was the right decision to vote it down years ago, and it's the right decision to vote no on it now.
Great. And again, if you have a question, you can go ahead and press 0 to ask it at any time. We're now going to go, we had a call from Robert in Silverton. Unfortunately, he had to drop off, but he wanted to ask Kevin a question, which is, why do farmers have to segregate crops under Measure 92?
That's a great question. So segregation would be required simply because a label is required that as of today and previously, there's just no regulatory or scientific justification for labeling and segregating that. And so on the farm, that means separate costly systems for growing, harvesting. If you're packaging and processing and transporting on the farm, it would just require that additional level of segregation for GE and non-GE, or GMO and non-GMO, in order to maintain the integrity of the crop and meet the labeling requirement. And in a lot of areas, depending on the crop, it could even require segregation spatially and temporally. So actually changing our crop rotation and diverting production out of some of the more profitable crops, or in some cases maybe even taking land out of production. So that, of course, can be really costly for farmers, especially those smaller farmers dealing with small acreage.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Kevin. And of course, it doesn't stop on the farm. It continues with the food stream into the processing plant and operation. That segregation would have to be maintained, transportation, the record keeping, the sworn statements. And, this happens whether you're manufacturing brooms, carrots, peas, whatever. The more time you touch a product, the more it's going to cost. And that's just the simple truth of it. That's economics 101 there. And that's really why this would have a increased food price.
Again, thank you, Michael, for that question. Now we're going to go to Nadine, who has a very basic question. But again, if you have a question of your own, you can press 0 on your phone to ask it at any time. Nadine?
Okay, I just wanted to know what GMO stands for. Hello?
Kevin, do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, great question, Nadine. So GMO just stands for genetically modified organism, which is a little imprecise because we've actually been modifying crops for eons. Basically, every crop that's in the grocery store, every crop that's in modern cultivation has been modified somewhere along the line in some way. And in recent decades, we've just become much more precise at the method that we use to modify them and enhance them with characteristics that improves the sustainability of farming and improves, in many ways, the quality of the end product. And so that additional precision has allowed us to identify and measure. So it's really nothing significantly different than what we've been doing for centuries. It's just that we've gotten a lot better at it, and as a result, farming has gotten more sustainable and more productive.
Now I have a question from Wyona. Wyona, I understand you want to talk about product exemptions?
Yes, I have heard some people that said that several foods would be exempt from this bill, and I wondered if you had ever heard about that.
Hey, Wyona, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question for you. Yeah, you've got your facts right. Yes, in fact, 2/3 of the food and beverage that's sold in the state gets exempt from the labeling requirement, so it wouldn't even be covered. You know, that's when we talk a lot about this being misleading and incomplete and inaccurate. That's what we're referring to, because so many foods that actually contain or were made with GMOs, they're not labeled only because they got a special exemption. And let me give you a few examples of what that is. First of all, it'd be foods like meat and dairy products that come from animals that were fed GMO grains and injected with GE medications. Well, they don't get labeled only because they have a special exemption. It's important to note that actually conflicts with the federal labeling standards. So that's one of the foods that is made with GMO and that gets a special exemption. Other foods are foods that are packaged to go, and what that means is, you know, if you go to a deli and you pick up a can of pop and a bag of chips, that doesn't have to have a label on it. But if you pick up the exact same can of pop and the exact same bag of chips at the grocery store, that does have to have a label on it. So it's all these exemptions and loopholes that make Measure 92 so misleading, and it doesn't provide accurate and reliable information to consumers. And it's why, really, the fundamental reason why we think it deserves a no vote.
Again, if you have any question, you can press 0 to ask it at any time. We're now going to go to Arden in Scotts Mills. Arden, you have a question for us? Arden, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. The question I had was kind of brought up a little bit a while ago, but genetically engineered seeds have been available for many, many, many years. Is that not true?
Yeah, Arden, that's exactly right. We've been modifying crops for centuries, and modern GMOs have been commercially grown for 2 decades, and so there's literally been billions of meals eaten, and if you count livestock, trillions of meals eaten, and there's just been zero, absolutely zero safety risks, health risks, environmental risks identified and associated with GMO. So that's why we're really not talking about safety at all. We're just simply talking about a marketing issue, a consumer issue, and I think that what consumers, what people voting, voters, policymakers should really care about is not whether something is genetically modified, but whether or not it has characteristics that we should be worried about. And this Measure 92 is not accomplishing that for us. With all the exemptions, it's not even really telling us if it's genetically modified, and even the genetically modified label is not telling us anything meaningful.
Thanks, Arden, for that question. It was a good one. And again, if you have a question of your own, you can just press 0 to ask it at any time. Now we're going to go to Crystal in Albany. Crystal, I understand you have a question.
Yes,
Crystal,
this is Linda.
There you go. Go ahead.
This is Linda, yes. I wanted to ask you a question. That's all right. I wanted to ask you a question. We have been hearing a lot of information, which I can't seem to prove it. But I have not understood. I have understood that in the past when I read about the GMO products, that it is not particularly dangerous for people who have poor health issues. Now, I teach food preservation so that people who are very concerned about their foods have a healthy alternative way of storing food. I have always said GMO foods were perfectly safe. I myself have multiple sclerosis, but have been receiving materials that talk about the dangers of putting these foods into our bodies. I cannot find anything that really proves there is a danger. Would you answer that just?
Yeah, Linda, you're exactly right. You clearly you've done your research on it, and you're right. And first of all, I'm sorry to hear that you suffer from health ailments, and I'm sorry that you have that situation. But you're exactly right. These are the foods that we have been eating and serving on our family dinner tables for over 20 years, and they are the most extensively tested crop in our entire food system. And that's not me saying that. That is the American Association for the Advancement of Science. GMO crops have been studied by every major scientific and medical organization in the world. For example, the World Health Organization and the Food and Drug Administration and the American Medical Association and the National Academy of Sciences, and the list goes on and on. And all these studies, in fact, there's been 1,700 of them, just to give you a number, all these studies reach the same conclusion. Not only are these foods safe, as you mentioned, Linda, they're actually identical to conventional crops. So you will find, and you'll find proponents in the Yes campaign, and they're trying to scare voters and consumers. And I think that's a shame, because this is a very important issue, and we've got to deal in the facts and the science. And the facts and the science are perfectly clear that these foods that we've been eating for decades now are perfectly safe. So thank you very much for your question. I appreciate it. It was a good one.
Great. And now we're going to go ahead and do our first poll question of the night, and this is for everyone on the line to answer. That question is, most people in Oregon have now received their ballots. When do you plan to fill out your ballot and vote no on 92 and send it in? If you'll fill it out and send it in this week, press 1. Press 2 if you'll send it in the next week, or press 3 if you've already sent it in. Again, our first question tonight is, most people in Oregon have now received their ballot. When do you plan to fill out your ballot and vote no on 92 and send it in? Press 1 if you'll fill it out and send it in this week. Press 2 if you'll send it in next week, or 3 if you've already sent it in. Now we're going to go to Neil in Roseburg. I understand Neil has a question about some ads he's been seeing recently on the air. Neil?
Yes, the ads that they show on TV is a man standing there with 2 bags of corn kernels, one with blue dye on it, and he's comparing that with Agent Orange. Well, Agent Orange is a herbicide. The bags that he holds in his hand could have a pesticide that would stop insects from ruining an entire corn crop. We don't know what it is that is on there. It could just be blue food coloring. But yet, to the basically uninformed in the big cities like Portland and Eugene and Salem, I mean, they'll see that and they'll say, "Oh, I'm not going to eat that." Well, he's comparing it to something entirely different, and
Neil, I've seen that. This is Kevin, and I've seen that ad, Neil, and it's really disturbing. It's a very deceptive ad. I think it's a shameful scare tactic. There's no, any seeds, any corn seeds can be treated organic, conventional, GMO. The seeds that are shown, the blue seeds on that ad, could be any type of dye. It's nothing that would be associated with GMO specifically. And in fact, GMOs in many ways are more sustainable and reduce both the amount of herbicides used on crops and allows farmers to use herbicides that are more benign, less harmful to the environment and to human health. And so it's just an incredibly misleading ad. It's deceptive, and I'm real disappointed that the proponents of Measure 92 would air that.
Thanks, Neil. And again, if you have a question of your own, you can press 0 to be connected and ask it. Now I want to go to Sandy in Dallas. I understand she has a question about testing of baby formula that was recently in the news. Sandy, go ahead.
Hello. This is Don in Eugene.
Oh, I'm sorry, Don. Why don't you go ahead? I understand you have a question as well.
Well, I did. I was curious as to what the polls are showing, whether this measure is favored to pass or fail. I, of course, follow the ads and very interested in the measure, but I don't know if I need to be really, really concerned about it, or, of course, everyone needs to be concerned about what they like or don't, but I was just kind of curious as to what the polls are showing as to what they predict the measure will do.
Hey, Dawn, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer this. Let me start off by saying, yeah, this is serious, and you've got to vote. And if I may suggest, you've got to vote no, and it sounds like you care about this. This is very critical that we get everybody out who opposes Measure 92 out to vote and send in their ballots before Halloween. So you asked about polling. Let's talk a little bit about that. You know, when this campaign first started and the Yes Coalition came out and, you know, they started doing some public polls on this, there was a tremendous amount of support. And I can understand why, because there's some surface appeal to Measure 92. But once voters started getting the facts about it, the support has dropped off significantly. And in fact, the latest poll that I've seen from Oregon Public Broadcasting has the support for the yes side under 50%. And that makes sense, because once people find out about this and they find out, oh, wow, this exempts 2/3 of the food that's even sold, and then they find out that, oh, there's already 2 different labeling standards, national labeling standards, that tell us if there's non-GMO foods, and that's the organic and non-GMO label. And then when consumers start finding out about the cost to them in the grocery store and both the bureaucracy, and then, of course, how it hurts Oregon family farmers, who, of course, are a huge driver to the Oregon economy, the support drops off. The measure simply fails consumers, and I think that's why you've seen the support drop off, and it's why we're urging a no vote.
Thanks, Don. Now we're going to go to Sandy in Dallas. Sorry about that, Sandy. Why don't you go ahead?
This is Meryl in Drain. I was interested in, I'm a rancher and a farmer, and wanted to know how this would affect farmers market, the sale of my sheep, and also donating to UCAN.
That's a good question, Meryl. So for your sheep, livestock would be exempt, and I think that's one of the things that, from a consumer perspective, is concerning for a lot of folks who'd like to see labeling with integrity. But from a farmer's perspective, that, of course, is a good thing. Selling your sheep, you don't have to worry about it. And maybe Ian can comment a little bit more, or Dana can comment more on your question about the farmer's market, because I don't deal much in those markets. But as I understand Measure 92, certainly the costs would fall heaviest on those smaller farmers that are marketing in niche locations, farmers markets, or locally, or something to that extent. And then and some of the legal risk also falls heaviest on that group as well. And then, of course, as a livestock grower, the cost of feed to just feed your livestock is another factor as well. So yeah, it certainly will affect someone like yourself. And what I'm most worried about is some of the smaller growing niche farmers, especially here in Central Oregon, where that market's picking up some speed and really are threatened by Measure 92.
And Meryl, I'll just add that I think there's some exposure for farmers or producers that are also engaging in retail at the farmers market. There is not this is so badly written that it leaves open the exposure to liability for those activities. So this, all in all, is a very dangerous measure, and that's why we need everyone's help to vote this thing down. You, your friends, your family, please tell as many people as you can. Thank you.
Thanks, Meryl. Okay, I think we've worked out the technical difficulties on our end. Sandy, do you want to go ahead now?
Hello? Yeah,
I've
been dropped twice. Yeah.
Well, you're on now.
Okay, thank you. Well, I was watching the news this evening, and the news channel said that 2 baby formulas were tested. They did find GMO in it, and it was not on the label. And I find that very interesting.
Sandy, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question for you. You know, this is simply just another shameful scare tactic that the yes side is pulled. And it's kind of what we've seen from them quite a bit, and I'm not really surprised they've done it, to be quite honest, because they will do anything other than talk about their initiative. But let's go ahead and talk about the issue that you raised, because I think it's important. You know, what we found out is that there is baby formula, and it's, you know, baby formula we've been feeding our families. It's what I fed my 3 children, and it has some GMO soy in it. And that's nothing new here. The yes side is really trying to make something that isn't there, and I think that's shameful for them because they're trying to scare families, and I think that's wrong. But at the same time, you know what? There may be families who prefer to feed their families foods without GMO ingredients in them, and they can look for not just the organic label, but also the non-GMO label. In fact, those are 2 of the fastest growing labels in the market today. You'll find them at grocery stores across the store. So, like I said, I think what we've seen here is just the yes side with another scare tactic as well, and I think it's absolutely shameful. But I think that there's options to consumers who want them, and I think that that's one of the many reasons that we simply don't need Measure 92, and it deserves a no vote.
And if I may add, you know, in the processing industry, food safety is the number one importance in what we do, regardless of what kind of crops we use in those ingredients. And so that it's very troubling that someone would say this. And it's just simply not true. You know, there is pesticides and herbicides used in organic farming, conventional farming, and GE farming. Everyone that uses, you know, is engaged in production agriculture uses it. To find it in a food, in a baby formula, just doesn't pass the smell test for me. It's just something that doesn't happen. Our food is the safest food on the planet. It is rigorously tested, and so it's just simply not true.
Sandy, thanks for asking us about that. And again, if you want to get the facts about the measure, you can go to factsabout92.com or vote no on 92.com. Now we're going to go to James in Pendleton. James has a question about the labeling. James?
Hi, I was just calling to ask, what do they actually have to put on the labels if the measure passes?
Hey, James, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question for you. They'd have to put on a label on there that says genetically engineered. And the thing about that, this is what really trips up the food processors, and this is why they're so troubled about it, because the label is actually in and of itself, it's actually inaccurate, because they have to put it on some products that actually don't have any GMO content in it. And those are going to be products such as sugar or cornstarch or soybean oil. You know, once those products are processed, even if they came from a GE plant, once they're processed, there's no protein in them at all, and therefore there's no GMO, because GMO presents itself as a protein. But yet, the way that Measure 92 is written, it would have to be labeled saying that it is genetically engineered. That's completely misleading and inaccurate to consumers. And so what food companies would have to do to avoid that label is they'd have to eat a couple of things. They'd have to either remake their food just for the state of Oregon, and they'd have to use higher-priced non-GMO ingredients. That's where the cost increase comes. At the same time, just for Oregon food, they have to segregate their products all the way through the food supply chain, starting down at the farm to the food processor and all the way to the grocery store to ensure that they're following compliance. And that's where the costs come from, all for a misleading label.
And James, real quick, I'll just want to add that, you know, anything that a food processor puts on their label, you have to substantiate it. You have to back it up. And that's why we don't put labels on them now, is because the 3 federal agencies in charge of genetically engineered crops say there's no substantial difference in conventional, organic, or GE foods, and that's why they're not there now. And that's what's troubling. We would have to put a label on something that has been scientifically proven over and over again that there is no difference. So I just want to make that clear, and that's why it's so troubling. And of course, we'd have to provide the sworn statements, the segregation, all this extra stuff that we don't have to do. We would be required to do it, and then that, of course, would raise costs. Thanks. Great question.
Great. And now it's time for our second poll question of the night. We want to hear from all of you. So our questions are, what action are you willing to take to protect Oregon farmers? Press 1 if you'll encourage your friends and family to vote no on Measure 92. Press 2 if you'll write a letter to the editor about voting no on Measure 92. Press 3 if you'll share information on Facebook or Twitter about why to vote no on Measure 92. Press 4 if you'll do all of the above. And remember, if you have a question for our panel tonight, you can press 0 at any time to ask that question. Now we're going to go to William in LeGrand. Hey, William. I understand you have a question for us? William still with us tonight? Mrs. Brown, are you still with us? All right, I think we lost them. We're now going to go to Charles Johnson in K Falls. Charles, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, the question is there any scientific evidence that there is something wrong with a GMO that labels it bad? And also, without GMO, what do we have to feed the world by just keeping with our modern standards as we do now?
Hey, Charles, this is Dana. I'll take the first part of your question. I think Kevin is best suited to answer the second part. But you were talking about the health of GMO foods. You know, these are the foods that we've been raising our families on. We've been eating them for over 20 years. They are the most extensively tested crop in our entire food system. And every major scientific and medical organization in the entire world has looked at GMO foods, and they all deem not only are they safe, they're actually identical to non-GMO foods. So they're extensively tested. And then I think you had a question about, what does GMO mean for feeding not just the state, but of course the world. Kevin can answer that.
Yeah, I mean it's a great point. It's a great question. Yields in the crops where we do have modern GMO, yields have improved dramatically, and not just yields, but resource use. So crops are less prone to drought, to pests, to all sorts of things that make it difficult to farm. And so modern technology has been incredibly useful to farmers, especially here in the U.S. over the last 20 years. And what's most concerning for me as a young farmer is that a label that essentially serves to stigmatize technology is going to have the impact of discouraging research and innovation and new seeds, new technology that could be really beneficial, especially here in Oregon.
Thanks. And again, we want to review our current poll question, which is, what actions are you willing to take to protect Oregon farmers? Press 1 if you'll encourage your friends and family to vote no on Measure 92. Press 2 if you'll write a letter to the editor about voting no on Measure 92. Press 3 if you'll share information on Facebook or Twitter about why we should vote no on 92. Or press 4 if it's all of the above. And of course, if you have a question, you can go ahead and press 0 right now. Now we're going to go to Matt in Albany. Matt, I understand you're an organic farmer and you have some questions.
Yes, this is Matt. My wife and I have a small organic farm. We're not certified, but we're highly diversified, and we sell all of our produce through the farmer's market. We understand that if this measure passes, we won't be forced to prove that our product is organic or is non-GMO unless a quote-unquote injured party questions us. And what I'm wondering is, what is the bar for that? If somebody, for some reason, has a gripe against us or doesn't like us and says, we think that you have GMO, does that automatically force us to pay to have all of our product tested?
That's a great question. Kevin, do you want to answer it?
Sure. I mean, I think the short answer is yes. If you're not certified, then you're not would not be exempt from the labeling requirement. So yeah, you would need to comply with the labels and all of the costs and record keeping and affidavits associated with compliance with labeling would be required. And in addition, the law singles out small farmers that retail direct to consumers. So just like yourself, that are, for example, selling at farmers markets and that type of location are singled out for lawsuits and fines that would fall directly on the farmer, which I think is really concerning because that's a growing part of agriculture here in Oregon.
Great. And now we're going to hear from Jane and Kaiser. Jane, do you have a question for us?
Yes, I was wondering if you can explain the difference between genetically modified versus the hybridization of a plant.
Sure. I'll take a stab at that, Jane. So the simple answer is hybrid plants are essentially crossbreeding. So it's a form of natural selection, excuse me, is the easiest way to describe it, where GMO is a process that in a specific, precise, and controlled way alters the genetic material in a plant. So you can have hybrid GMOs or non-hybrid GMOs, and that's the main difference. So hybridization can occur in nature. It can also occur in a laboratory or in a greenhouse, whereas modern GMO that we're talking about is, as I said, a more precise, controlled, specific way to improve the genetic material of a plant.
And again, if you have a question, press 0 at any time. We'd love to answer it. Now we're going to hear from Gary in Salem. Gary, are you there?
Hi, I'm Gary, and I was fortunate to work for a lot of farmers in North Marion County when I was a young lad. And 90% of those farmers, they're gone. And my suspicion is on this bill is the fact that it was written by Dr. Magic of California, and most of the products that are exempt comes from California and Washington and out of state that are exempt. And I think our Oregon farmers have been hurt enough, and I think this will really make their markets a lot bigger, and a lot more of our farmers going away if it passes. I am definitely voting no, but my question is, does anybody thought of that factor in this measure? Because it's really upsetting that an outside stater would write something for our Oregon.
Yeah, thanks, Gary.
Well, Gary,
and, thanks for speaking up and sharing your views on that. I totally agree. I think that seems to me that there's no secret that the exclusions in the bill are very deliberate and a political way of getting Measure 92 passed, but basically making the labeling requirement so distorted that it's not actually providing any consumer benefit whatsoever, and only serves to advance the activists or the special interest of the folks pushing labeling.
And I would just add, I think what's so troubling about this is it just selects which farmers are good and which are not. You know, we need all the tools in the toolbox to feed a growing population. We need organics, we need conventional, we need genetically engineered crops. And I think this just unfairly targets those producers that choose to grow for a variety of reasons, economic, whatever, to grow genetically engineered crops. And I just don't think that's good for the agriculture community in general. So thanks for the question.
Great. We're starting to wrap up our time here. I wanted to give Kevin a couple of minutes to give his concluding thoughts, but I really appreciate you all taking the time to call in tonight.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks for the opportunity to share a farmer's perspective here in Central Oregon. Really pleased with the farmers all across the state that have joined in opposition to Measure 92 and helped get information out there about why this is such a costly measure, such a costly requirement for farmers that has a lot of unintended consequences in the future. So I really urge you to vote no on 92 and talk to your friends, talk to your family, and urge them to do the same.
Yeah, and I would just like to say, thank you for everyone that's spent some time with us this evening. It's a very dangerous ballot measure that is in front of us all. And, in the end, it's very troubling because it really adds a cost to food that doesn't need to be there. Food producers are going to have to make a decision whether or not they put a label on their package, which carries a negative connotation, and that would cost money because they're going to have to go through the segregation and everything that's in the bill, or they can source ingredients that are not genetically engineered. Both of those avenues will add costs to the consumer. When there's already avenues out there, that gives consumers that information through USDA organic or non-GMO projects. So it really is unreliable. It really is misleading, and in the end, it is unneeded. So thank you all, and please vote no.
Everyone, thank you so much for spending some time with us tonight to discuss Measure 92 and its failings and what it means to consumers. For voters out there who really care about GMO foods and wanting to know if those ingredients are in your food, Measure 92 fails those consumers because it's so unreliable and there's so many exemptions and loopholes. They don't get the accurate information. And I think it fails them. It fails consumers who really care about the cost of groceries, because study after study has shown that the cost of groceries will go up by hundreds of dollars a year. And that is very costly, and all for a labeling system that provides inaccurate and unreliable information. And there's a reason why, this coalition has come together. There's 33,000 people in our coalition who are urging a no vote. And we've been endorsed by 12 statewide newspapers who have looked at Measure 92 and heard from both sides on the issue. And those 12 papers have all said Measure 92 deserves a no vote. So we thank you for spending some time with us tonight. Urge you to vote no and encourage your family and friends to do the same thing. And most importantly, get those ballots in so they can get counted.
Thanks. We really appreciate you all joining us tonight. And if you didn't get a chance to ask your question, you can stay on the line and leave us a voicemail. We'll make sure to get back to you from the No Coalition. We also want to encourage you to join the coalition. You can go to votenoon92.com to join our coalition and join people all across the state speaking up against this measure. And we also want to make sure that you get your ballot in. Remember that the voice is in your hands, but only if you use your vote. Make sure to return it, mark it no, urge your family and friends to vote no, and make sure to get those ballots in by November 4th. Thank you so much, and you have a great evening.